The sound scissors make when cutting through 60-year-old silk is not a tear or a rip. It is a whisper, a soft, final sigh as threads woven in a different time, with a different tension, give way. I knew the sound intimately. I had spent years of my life preserving fabrics far more delicate than the dress Genevieve was wearing. Her gown was a modern confection of pale gold, designed to cling and shimmer under the ballroom's crystal chandeliers, a declaration of wealth so profound it bordered on aggressive. Mine was a simple column of navy blue wool crepe, a vintage piece from the 40s I'd restored myself. It was comfortable. It had history. To Genevieve, it was a target. She stood before me, a flute of champagne held in a hand so burdened with diamonds it seemed a miracle she could lift it. The air around her smelled of expensive perfume, something with tuberose and a base note of contempt, and it was thick enough to taste. Liam, the man who was supposed to be my partner, stood between us, a buffer made of beautifully tailored wool and utter spinelessness. "Alara, darling," Genevieve began, her voice a trickle of honeyed poison. "You look so practical. It's refreshing." She let her eyes drift from my dress down to my shoes, sensible leather flats I'd chosen for the long hours of standing. A tiny, perfect smile played on her lips, almost utilitarian. Liam shifted his weight. A nervous tick. He'd been doing it all night, every time Genevieve drifted into our orbit like a predator circling a kill. "Jen, leave it," he murmured, the words lacking any real force. It was the request of a man asking for peace, not the demand of a man defending the woman he claimed to love. Genevieve ignored him, her focus entirely on me. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, were cold and assessing. "I just find it fascinating, that's all." Liam has always been drawn to such earthy types. It's a phase, I'm sure. A way of connecting with the common man. She took a delicate sip of her champagne. "Still, to bring a peasant to the founder's gala? It's a bold choice, Liam. Almost radical." Peasant. The word didn't echo. It landed, a solid, heavy thing in the center of my chest. My breath caught, a tiny snag in the rhythm of my lungs. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, a tide of humiliation I couldn't control. I looked at Liam, waiting. This was it. This was the moment he would finally draw a line. He would take my hand, turn to his ex-fiancée, and tell her precisely where the boundary was. He would defend me. He would choose me. Instead, he laughed, a short, strangled sound of pure panic. "Oh, Jen, you're terrible," he said, trying to frame her cruelty as a joke. "Alara has a very important job. She's an archivist, a conservator." Genevieve's smile widened. It was a victor's smile. "Of course. How wonderful. Preserving things. It's important to remember where we come from." She gestured vaguely at me with her glass. "And what we've managed to rise above." She turned then, the gold silk of her dress swirling around her ankles, and melted back into the glittering crowd, leaving her poison to do its work. I stood frozen. The ambient noise of the gala, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of 100 conversations, the distant swell of the string quartet, faded to a dull roar in my ears. All I could feel was the wool of my dress against my skin and the weight of Liam's hand as it finally, belatedly, found my arm. "I'm so sorry, Elle," he whispered, his breath warm and smelling of champagne and compromise. She's had a lot to drink. She doesn't mean it. But she did. She meant every syllable. And the worst part, the part that felt like swallowing glass, was that he knew it, too. He just didn't have the courage to say so. I didn't pull my arm away. I did nothing. I simply watched the light catch the facets of the diamonds on a passing dowager's throat and felt a part of myself turn to ice. It was a quiet, internal process, like the slow crystallization of water in a deep crevice. No one could see it happen, but the change was absolute. The warmth was gone. This wasn't the first time. It was merely the loudest. Genevieve had been a ghost at the feast of our relationship from the beginning. Not a memory, but an active, malevolent presence. They had been together for 7 years, a fixture in this world of inherited wealth and performative philanthropy. Their breakup had been, according to Liam, a mutual decision based on differing life goals. According to the society pages, it was because her family's portfolio had taken a hit and Liam's parents had quietly advised him to seek a more stable merger. He had met me 6 months later at a university library fundraiser. I was there as a consultant, advising them on the preservation of their rare book collection. He was there because his family's name was on the building. He'd been charmed, he said, by my passion, by the way my eyes lit up when I talked about paper acidity and the specific chemical composition of 14th century iron gall ink. He said I was real, a welcome anchor in his superficial world. For a time, I believed him. I loved the quiet focus of my life. My studio was a sanctuary, smelling of old leather, linseed oil, and reverence. My work was a conversation with the past. I would spend weeks painstakingly restitching the spine of a book that had been silent for centuries, my hands steady, my mind calm. I earned my place in the world through skill and knowledge, not birthright. Liam's world was different. It was a world of surfaces, of unspoken rules and brutal hierarchies disguised by polite smiles. Genevieve was its queen. Her attacks were always subtle, delivered with surgical precision. When Liam brought me to his family's country estate for the first time, Genevieve had coincidentally been invited for the same weekend. As I admired the library, a magnificent room with floor-to-ceiling shelves, she had drifted over. "Liam tells me you work with books," she'd said, trailing a perfectly manicured finger over a leather-bound volume. "How lovely." All that quiet time, she'd smiled at me, a picture of warmth. It must be a comfort not to have the pressure of managing a real legacy. Another time, at a restaurant, she'd complimented my necklace, a simple silver locket from my mother. "How charmingly sentimental," she'd mused, her own throat glittering with a river of sapphires. I've never been one for keepsakes. If something isn't worth insuring, is it really worth keeping? Liam had just squeezed my hand under the table, his silent plea for me to let it go. And I had. Over and over, I had swallowed the insults, accepted the private apologies, and believed his promises that he would talk to her. I had mistaken his conflict avoidance for kindness. I had told myself that our love, the thing we built in the quiet moments away from his world, was strong enough to withstand the onslaught. I had been naive. Love doesn't exist in a vacuum. It is tested not in the quiet moments, but in the crucible of public loyalty. And in that moment, at the gala, under the weight of the word peasant, I saw with blinding clarity that Liam was not my partner. He was a spectator at my execution. He was the well-meaning man who held my coat, while someone else sharpened the blade. The humiliation wasn't just Genevieve's attack, it was his silence. His complicity was the deeper wound. It was the wound that would not close. The band started a new song, a waltz. Couples began to drift onto the marble dance floor. Liam, desperate to restore normalcy, gestured toward them. "Would you like to dance?" he asked, his voice strained with forced cheerfulness. He wanted to glide past the ugliness, to lose it in the swirl of a formal dance. He wanted me to smile and pretend it hadn't happened. He wanted me to be the bigger person, because being the stronger one was a burden he was unwilling to bear. I looked at him, really looked at him, at the handsome, familiar face, the eyes that could be so kind in private, the mouth that had just failed to speak a single word in my defense. And I felt a profound sense of distance, as if I were looking at him through the wrong end of a telescope. He was small and very far away. "No," I said. My voice was flat, devoid of the emotion that was churning inside me. "I don't think I will." Genevieve, however, was not finished. Her victory had been too easy. She needed an encore. She reappeared a few minutes later, holding a new glass of champagne, her expression one of theatrical concern. "Oh, darling, I do hope I didn't offend you earlier," she said, loud enough for the people nearby to hear. "It's just banter. We all tease each other in our little circle. You'll get used to it." She placed a hand on Liam's arm, a familiar gesture of possession. "Speaking of our circle, Liam, I was just talking to the Sutherlands. They were asking about the Aldrich Psalter. They're thinking of donating a piece to the museum, and they were wondering about its valuation for the tax credit." The Aldrich Psalter, the crown jewel of Liam's family collection, a 13th century illuminated manuscript, priceless not just for its vellum pages and gold leaf illuminations, but for its unbroken provenance. It was his heritage, the tangible proof of his blue-blooded lineage. Genevieve turned her gaze back to me, a glint of cruel amusement in her eyes. "You work with old books, don't you, Alara? You could probably give us a ballpark. Though I suppose you've never handled anything of that caliber. The museum keeps the truly valuable pieces away from the junior staff, I imagine." And there it was. The uncrossable line. It wasn't just an insult about my clothes or my background. It was a direct assault on my competence, my profession, my identity. It was the dismissal of my life's work as a quaint hobby, the erasure of the years of study, the discipline, the passion. She had taken the one thing that was mine, the one area where I possessed an authority she could never purchase, and tried to turn it into another weapon against me. The metallic taste of shame in my mouth was replaced by something else, something cold and hard and clear. It was the crystalline clarity of absolute certainty. I looked at Liam. He was already forming an apology on my behalf. Alara's work is very specialized, Jen. It's not really about appraisals. He was trying to protect me by diminishing me, by cordoning off my expertise as something small and irrelevant to their world of high-stakes finance and cultural capital. I held up a hand, a small, quiet gesture that stopped him mid-sentence. I let the silence hang for a moment. Then I turned my full attention to Genevieve. The heat in my face was gone. The tremor in my hands had ceased. I felt a strange and terrible calm settle over me. It was the calm of a surgeon before the first incision. The Aldrich Psalter, I said, my voice even and low. Yes, I'm familiar with it, I paused. Vellum, 198 folios. Franco-Flemish school, likely Bruges, circa 1260. The binding is not original. It's a 17th century calfskin replacement, probably done in Paris, which unfortunately resulted in a rather aggressive cropping of the outer margin, losing some of the peripheral glosses. A flicker of surprise in Genevieve's eyes. Liam stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. I continued, the information flowing effortlessly. The primary illuminator is believed to be a student of the master of the Saint-Chapelle group, but the historiated initial on folio 12 recto shows a distinct Italianate influence, which is unusual. The ultramarine pigment is of exceptional quality, likely sourced from Afghan lapis lazuli, indicating a patron of immense wealth. The real issue, however, is the condition. I've seen high-resolution scans. There's significant flaking of the gesso base on at least 3 of the full-page miniatures, likely due to fluctuations in humidity. Whoever is storing it now doesn't understand the principles of climate control for parchment. I looked directly into her eyes. It's been handled improperly. The oils from people's hands, even clean ones, can cause irreparable damage over time. It needs immediate professional intervention. I let that sink in. The implication was clear. She and her kind were the source of the damage. As for valuation, I said, my voice dropping even further, becoming almost confidential. Appraising it for insurance is one thing. The Sutherlands are asking about fair market value for a charitable donation. Given its condition issues and the recent sale of the De Croix hours, I'd estimate its current auction value at somewhere between 8 and 10 million euros. If it were properly conserved, perhaps 12. But it would need at least 18 months of dedicated work in a proper facility. The silence that followed was absolute. The small circle of people around us had stopped talking. They were all staring. Genevieve's perfect smile was frozen on her face, a brittle facade threatening to crack. She had expected me to be flustered, to stammer, to be intimidated. She had not expected a forensic, authoritative demolition of a subject she thought she owned. She had used the book as a symbol of her world, and I had just reclaimed it as an artifact in mine. My world, I now realized, was infinitely more real. Liam was looking at me with a new expression. It wasn't just surprise. It was awe. And in that awe, I saw the pathetic truth. He was attracted to my strength, but only when it was convenient, only when it was performed in private. He had never seen it as something to be wielded, something to be respected in the face of a threat. Genevieve recovered first, her condescension rushing back in to fill the vacuum. How thorough, she said, her voice tight. You must have spent hours on Google preparing for tonight. It's almost convincing. It was a weak jab, but it was all she had left. I didn't bother to respond. Instead, I reached into my small clutch purse and removed my phone. My movements were deliberate, economical. I unlocked the screen and opened my messaging app. My thumbs moved quickly, typing 2 words to a contact saved under a single initial. It's time. I sent the message and put the phone away. I looked up and met Genevieve's mocking gaze. I gave her nothing. No anger, no triumph. Just a placid, empty stillness. I had done my part. The rest was no longer in my hands. I felt a strange sense of release, of letting go. I was no longer a participant in their drama. I was merely an observer, waiting for the final act. Less than 5 minutes passed. It felt like both an eternity and an instant. The string quartet was playing something by Vivaldi. A waiter offered me a canapé, which I declined with a small shake of my head. Liam was trying to speak to me, his voice a low, urgent murmur, asking me what I was doing, who I had texted. I didn't answer. I just watched the main entrance to the ballroom. Then it began, a subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. A few heads turned toward the doors. The hotel's impeccably dressed security chief was there, looking flustered, speaking into his wrist. He was flanked by two men who did not belong. They were not in tuxedos. They wore simple, perfectly tailored dark suits, with no visible weapons, but they moved with an unnerving economy and a palpable sense of purpose that made them more intimidating than any uniformed guard. They scanned the room, their eyes missing nothing. Their gaze settled on me. One of them spoke quietly into a lapel microphone. Then, they stepped aside, creating a clear path. Through the grand archway walked a man in his late 60s, his silver hair cut short, his posture ramrod straight. He wore a suit of the same dark, severe cloth as his escorts. It was Klaus, my father's chief of staff. He had been with our family since before I was born. His expression was, as always, one of serene, implacable competence. He walked directly toward me, his polished English shoes making no sound on the marble floor. The crowd parted for him instinctively, a silent sea of silk and diamonds receding before his quiet authority. He stopped a respectful 3 feet from me. He did not smile. He simply inclined his head in a gesture that was not quite a bow, but was laden with a depth of deference that silenced the entire ballroom. The Vivaldi ground to a halt as the musicians, one by one, lowered their instruments. "Your Highness," Klaus said, his voice calm and clear, carrying easily in the sudden stillness. "Forgive the intrusion. Your father was concerned about the hour. He has sent the transport to escort you home. Your Highness." The 2 words dropped into the room like stones into a perfectly still pond. The ripples spread outwards, a wave of shock and disbelief. I saw the comprehension dawn on 100 faces. I saw the champagne flute slip from Genevieve's fingers, shattering on the marble floor with a sound that was shockingly loud in the silence. Her face, a mask of smug superiority moments before, had collapsed. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving behind a sallow, waxy pallor. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She looked from me to Klaus and back again, her mind frantically trying to reconcile the image of the peasant with the reality of the title he had just spoken. I turned to Liam. He looked like he had been physically struck. His face was ashen, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and a dawning, sickening understanding. He was seeing me for the first time, not as the quiet, clever archivist, but as something else entirely. Something he had failed to protect, and in doing so, had revealed his own profound inconsequence. He had thought his world was the only one that mattered. He was just now realizing it was nothing but a gilded cage, and he was on the inside, while I had always held the key. I gave Klaus a small, grateful nod. "Thank you, Klaus. I'm ready to leave." I didn't look at Liam or Genevieve again. I turned and walked toward the exit, with Klaus and his men falling into formation around me. As I reached the grand foyer, I could hear the frantic whispers erupting in the ballroom behind me. The sound of a reputation, an entire social hierarchy, being dismantled in real time. Genevieve, spurred into action by pure panic, hurried after us. "Wait," she called out, her voice shrill. "Please, I didn't know. I didn't stop. I didn't turn around." One of Klaus's men moved to intercept her, a silent, immovable wall of dark wool. I continued through the lobby and out into the cool night air. The hotel's circular driveway was usually a chaotic ballet of limousines and